have only the backup session because few people missed out the introduction of setting up environment, working with TypeScript and all. So we are going to discuss that concept today, right? Yeah, screen will come when I share it, right? I haven't shared the screen. You will see the screen when I shared it, okay? So, in this session, I will give you the basic overview of what actually we discussed in the introduction of TypeScript technically. How do we set up environment and working with TypeScript actually? So, people who missed out the setting of installing of TypeScript, notes already uploaded, you can go through that. That you will learn when we start Angular. When we start Angular, you will learn about Angular, right? No need to worry about Angular now. You are our regular session student. Then currently we are discussing TypeScript. That is enough at this point, okay? So when we start Angular, at that time, I will tell you what is Angular, okay? Yeah. So here today's session is because many people missed out the installations and setup concept, and we already started TypeScript. So they face problem in working with that. That is the reason we are conducting the backup session here. Right? I am not conducting all the demo sessions again here. Understood the point? I hope you are clear. And you can continue, and you will know about everything later. Angular, what is Angular and all. Currently, we are not dealing any Angular first. So we will go and see with the TypeScript actually. So first point, actually what we learned is what is TypeScript. So we discussed about the point, what is TypeScript and why we need TypeScript actually. The concept of TypeScript. So first important is technically TypeScript is an open source cross-platform language, open source cross-platform language. Actually, TypeScript was originally introduced. TypeScript was originally introduced by Microsoft. TypeScript belongs to Microsoft as a part of its technology called .NET. As a part of its technology .NET. Anders Hasselberg, he introduced he is the designed TypeScript. He is the architect of TypeScript. He designed TypeScript. The TypeScript language architecture was designed by Anders Hasselberg. So, and it is maintained by maintained by Microsoft. So Microsoft, it is maintained by Microsoft. So actually TypeScript is used by developers. TypeScript is used by developers to overcome the issues, to overcome the issues with the JavaScript, to overcome the issues with JavaScript in web development actually. That means what are the problems in JavaScript we were having? So, and to overcome all those problems, TypeScript is used by developers. So, what are the problems of JavaScript actually? So, what are the problems of JavaScript? So, what are the issues of JavaScript? So, what is problem with JavaScript is what are the issues with the JavaScript? So the main issues with the JavaScript is not strongly typed language. JavaScript is not strongly typed language. So not strongly typed language means, for example, suppose I said some var x is equal to 10 and var and x is equal to some a. That means x is initialized with number, but you are storing a string. So this is allowed, and this is valid. There is no problem. So that means contradictory type of data can be stored. In order to restrict only number, only string, we have to explicitly write the logic for that. That is the problem with not being strongly typed, not being strong. That is one main problem with JavaScript. Another problem is the JavaScript. It is not an OOP language. It is not an OOP language. So actually it supports only a few features of OOP. So it supports only few features of OOP, but it is not complete OOP language. So that means it's not an OOP language. So that is the problem with JavaScript. So code level securities and reusability concerns, several issues are there. It is not a complete object oriented programming. So JavaScript, it is not implicitly strictly typed. That means code inconsistency will come if language is not strictly typed. We have to make JavaScript strictly typed explicitly. Strictly typed means, suppose if I directly entered x equal to 20, x is a variable which is not declared. Without declaring, we are trying to use that variable, then this is also valid, no problem. JavaScript is valid if JavaScript
మళ్ళీ స్ట్రీమింగ్ అలగట్లేదని కొంచెం వేసాను వాటర్ ఎక్కువ అయితే అప్పుడు మమ్మీ పంపిస్తుంది మళ్ళీ పెట్టాను స్విచ్ అయినా కూడా అలగట్లేదు స్ట్రీమింగ్ నేను చేసుకుంటే ఇది ఇంతే బాగున్నా.
So JavaScript have all these issues, so which are problem for a developer. This is not a problem for browser. Browser can easily understand JavaScript, and that is the primary. It is the primary and native language that is understandable to browsers.
Huh?
So but developers needs a language. Developer needs a language which can handle these issues and make the development process more easy. So that is the reason. So the main features of TypeScript, the key features of TypeScript. One of the main feature of TypeScript is advantages is, so it is it is strongly typed. Second important is it is strictly typed. Another important point is it is an OOP language. It supports all the features of object-oriented programming. And very important is it supports all kinds of low-level features. So that allows to communicate with the hardware services. Remember, TypeScript is not only for web development. TypeScript is a very huge language, so it can be used. TypeScript can be used for even large scale applications. That means the applications that can interact with machines. So TypeScript can, that means hardware devices. So TypeScript can be used at very large scale also. It's not a small language. It's a very large scale. It can be used for building large scale applications. So these are all the features of TypeScript. So actually what happened is, before Angular, Google actually introduced AngularJS in early 2010. They introduced AngularJS, and AngularJS is JavaScript based. It is JavaScript based. So obviously, lot of issues are there with the JavaScript based language framework. So lot of problems, lot of issues are there in AngularJS. To overcome those issues, Google thought that they will design a completely new framework, because AngularJS was not designed for market requirements actually. AngularJS was internally designed by Google for their internal purpose. But developers globally started using AngularJS after it is made as open source, and they started using for developing their applications also. But the problem is AngularJS is completely JavaScript based and it has a lot of issues. So to overcome those issues, so Google Angular team thought of designing a complete new technology, new framework, which can overcome the issues. And they decided to design a language also newly. So Google Angular team started rebuilding a complete new framework called Angular. Rebuilding a new framework called Angular with a language called they started a language called ETScript actually. They started a language called ETScript. ETScript is the language started by Google to address the issues address the issues of JavaScript. But Microsoft already have TypeScript before EdScript was there. So Microsoft suggested the Google Angular team to use that TypeScript instead of EdScript because they were again designing the same type of language. EdScript was again designed similar to TypeScript because they don't know that TypeScript was there because a Microsoft internally uses TypeScript. World doesn't know about TypeScript. People across the world don't know about TypeScript. Internally, Microsoft is using that language. And suddenly they saw that Google also trying a similar language. Then they said that, so why can't you try the TypeScript? Because already it is developed. Then Google Angular team had a look on TypeScript and they are very much satisfied with TypeScript because that is what they are trying to build again. Then they thought that, so let's stop this EdScript instead of wasting time in again designing a new one. Already TypeScript is there, so implement that TypeScript. So now you are learning a technology which is powered by two big people, right? That means you are learning a technology, so framework designed by Google, so that is Angular, and the language Angular, and the language designed by Microsoft, that is TypeScript. So that means now you are learning a technology which is powered by these two very big people, right? Google and Microsoft. So how this TypeScript actually works? So one of the great advantage in the features, one more important you should know is TypeScript is built with TypeScript. So that means every language is built with a low-level language actually. For example, you have Java. TypeScript is one large scale language. Entire TypeScript is built with TypeScript only. That means TypeScript is directly understandable to hardware. TypeScript directly interacts with hardware. That is one of the great feature of this language is it is a large scale language which is built with itself, TypeScript itself. But the problem is when we are using TypeScript on web, TypeScript is not understandable to browser. TypeScript is not understandable to browser. So it is not understandable to browser. It is compiled into JavaScript. It is transcompiled into JavaScript. That means it is translated into JavaScript. So developers use TypeScript for building application. And that TypeScript will be converted into JavaScript so that it can be understandable to browser. So directly browser cannot understand TypeScript. So developers use TypeScript so to build application, which is again translated into JavaScript. How this TypeScript, what this TypeScript comprises of? That means you need to understand the basic TypeScript architecture, how it comprises of the basic TypeScript architecture. TypeScript architecture. How this actually TypeScript works, the basic architecture of TypeScript. Actually, entire TypeScript is built with TypeScript. So this is the basic architecture of TypeScript. Let's see the TypeScript architecture. So this is the TypeScript architecture. These are all the components of TypeScript. So TypeScript comprises of all this. That is the basic architecture of TypeScript. So these are the components of TypeScript. What are these? A basic overview, you will see that because you are going to learn it actually one by one. In the TypeScript architecture, you can observe. So we have a core compiler in the TypeScript architecture. You can see that. So in this architecture, so we have a TypeScript core compiler. We have a TypeScript core compiler. This TypeScript core compiler, this is the core compiler. This core compiler is responsible for identifying the issues in the code that you have written. That means it verifies the keywords, it verifies the syntaxes for every function. It checks the problems in the code that you have written, and it will report if there are any problems in the code. So that is the purpose of core compiler. It is again managed by several files. It is again managed by several files. You can see there is core.ts, program.ts, scanner.ts. Every file have different responsibility. For example, core.ts, it is used for encapsulating all the TypeScript code into one unit. Program.ts, it is used for starting the TypeScript execution. Scanner, it is responsible for handling input activities. Parser is responsible for translating one type to another type. Checker is used for verifying the data types, the variable types, so the keyword types, function types. All this is done by checker. Emitter, it is responsible for handling the output activities. So that means the core compiler is responsible for verifying the TypeScript code that you have written. Verifying the TypeScript code that you have written and report the problems in the code. So after verifying the problems in your code, TypeScript code is ready, but browser can't understand. That is the reason TypeScript uses another compiler called standalone compiler. There is another compiler called standalone compiler. This standalone compiler will take the compiled TypeScript file and it will translate into JavaScript. So converting the TypeScript file into JavaScript is managed by this TypeScript compiler. Is managed by the TypeScript compiler. Which compiler? Standalone compiler. So verifying the problems first, it is done by core compiler. After verifying the problems, translating into JavaScript is done by the standalone compiler. Standalone compiler. That's what two compilers are. So you have to use this standalone compiler TSC. What this standalone compiler will do is it will internally use the core compiler. It will internally use this core compiler. Through that compiler, first it will verify the problems. After verifying, it will translate into JavaScript. So internally both are used. Internally both are working. Internally both are working actually. So that is the standalone and the core compilers. Two types of compilers are there. You have language service. Language service is nothing but, generally in computer programming, a service means it comprises of predefined business logic. Service comprises of predefined business logic. It contains predefined business logic. Actually here, language service means whatever the keywords, whatever the functions, whatever the library that is required for TypeScript, all that library is maintained inside this language service. It is maintained in language service. The compilers that we have, these compilers will verify the code that you have written from this language service. That means they will go to the language service and they will check in the language service what is the function syntax, and what is the keyword. So it will verify that and it will identify that the same you are writing or not. If the same you are not writing, then it will report an error. That means compilers gets the information about, so the syntaxes, about the keywords from language service. Language service comprises of all the library. So for your language, that library will be used by compilers to talks about server. Server means it is responsible for, a server is responsible for managing the tasks. Like here, TS server is responsible for, so loading, it is responsible for loading your programs. So that means loading your programs. So compiling your programs. So processing the programs. That means execution. That means where the compilation, where the processing of your TypeScript program will happen. Compiling is done by compiler only, but where it is compiled? So it is compiled on the server. TypeScript will internally have a TypeScript server. It will first load your TypeScript program into that server. It will load the language service into server. It will load the compiler into server. Then it will compile your program. There it will compile your program. It will process your program and it will generate the output and send it. That means the request from the client, response to the client, processing the request, generating the response, everything is managed inside this server. The programs are compiled, the programs are generated with response for the requests. Everything is managed inside this server. Compiler will compile, but where it will compile? It will compile on server. So language service is injected into server, compilers are injected into server. The entire processing happens in the server. we have a TS server. This is where entire process happens. Now we have VS shim. Shims are very common for any software developer if he knows any language or any technology. Generally, shim is nothing but shim is one tool. Actually, shim is a tool used by majority of programming languages who calls themselves as cross-platform. If you heard anywhere the word cross-platform, that means Java is cross-platform, .NET is cross-platform. Another library for cross-platform. So first it will use language service. After that it will use managed language service to make your TypeScript run on every operating system services. So that is the reason your TypeScript can reach any device. Any device. It can reach any device. So for any operating system services. That's what actually the architecture. So editors is not a part of TypeScript architecture. It is just kept here. Actually, editors is nothing but it contains configuration for the tools which are used to run this TypeScript, control the TypeScript and work with the TypeScript. That means editors are the software tools that we use for building TypeScript application. There are so many types of editors. You can go to the official editors config. It's editors config. .com. You can find these are all editors. That means you can see these are all editors. So these are all editors. You can see these are all editors. You can use all these editors to build a TypeScript. That means you can use all these editors for TypeScript. You can use anything. So many will be there. So currently we are using Visual Studio Code. You can use various editors. You can use various tools and various editors. These are popularly used editors. But Visual Studio Code, why we prefer Visual Studio Code? Because it is from the people who built that language. Visual Studio Code belongs to Microsoft. It is completely open source, free. And it is designed by the the same people who built the language TypeScript. That is the best for any TypeScript based technology you are learning. Microsoft editors are the best. Why? Because they will provide, because these are the people who are building that language. They will provide good support than anybody else in the world. That's the reason we follow this. So this is the basic architecture. So how the TypeScript works actually. So we write the programs, we transcompile them, and we give to the browsers. That means you write a
ఇక్కడ నేను మార్క్